The table was full, the laughter loud, but when she stepped forward, everything went quiet. A servant blocked her path. "Not for you," he muttered. Others nodded in agreement. Just an orphan girl, dust on her dress, hunger in her eyes. She didn't belong, they said. She stood there, silent, watching plates pass her by. The smell of food filled the air, but no one offered her a seat. No one saw her worth. But far above, in the sky, someone else did. Someone powerful. Someone searching. The ground began to tremble. Heads turned upward as a shadow passed over the courtyard. The sound grew louder, a helicopter blade slicing through the silence. It landed with force, kicking up dust and doubt. A man stepped out, eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't ask for the host. He didn't speak to the rich guests. He walked straight to her, the girl they had turned away. "I've been looking for you," he said. And in that moment, the orphan girl no one wanted became the only one who mattered. Welcome to Heroes Unheard. Before we continue this emotional story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being a part of it. The Riverside Academy had been founded in 1847 as a finishing school for the daughters of America's most prominent families. Its red brick buildings and ivy-covered walls spoke of tradition and privilege, of generations of young women who had been prepared for lives of influence and social responsibility. The school's motto, carved in marble above the main entrance, read, "Excellence through heritage," and every aspect of campus life was designed to reinforce the importance of family legacy and social standing. Emma Rodriguez had arrived at Riverside Academy 3 weeks earlier, not as a student, but as part of a scholarship program that brought underprivileged children to elite institutions for what administrators called cultural enrichment experiences. The program was designed more for the benefit of current students than for the scholarship recipients themselves, providing wealthy teenagers with opportunities to demonstrate their charitable nature while earning community service credits required for college applications. Emma was 15 years old and had been living in the state foster care system since she was 7, when her parents had died in a car accident that had left her with no relatives willing or able to take her in. She had moved through 12 different homes in 8 years, some better than others, but none offering the stability or affection that might have helped her heal from the trauma of losing everything she had known about family and belonging. The scholarship that had brought her to Riverside Academy was supposed to last for 6 months, giving her access to educational opportunities that would never have been available in the underfunded public schools she had attended throughout her childhood. She was grateful for the chance, even though she understood that she was expected to be grateful in ways that went beyond the normal appreciation any student might feel for educational opportunities. The current students at Riverside Academy came from families whose names appeared in Forbes magazine and Society pages, whose parents owned companies that employed thousands of people, whose trust funds ensured that they would never have to worry about practical concerns like paying rent or buying groceries. They moved through the campus with the unconscious confidence of people who had never doubted their right to occupy any space they entered. Emma tried to navigate this world with the careful observation skills that had helped her survive in foster care, learning quickly which teachers would treat her fairly and which would expect her to be grateful for any attention at all. She discovered that her academic abilities were stronger than those of many students who had attended private schools their entire lives. But she also learned that intellectual capability meant little in an environment where social connections mattered more than individual achievement. The dormitory where Emma lived was a testament to the school's commitment to maintaining appropriate hierarchies. The scholarship students were housed in a separate wing from the paying students, in rooms that were smaller and less well-appointed, with shared bathrooms and minimal privacy. The official explanation was that this arrangement allowed the scholarship recipients to bond with each other and receive additional support from staff members specially trained in working with underprivileged youth. The reality was that it served to remind everyone of their place in the social order while allowing the paying families to feel generous about their charity without having to actually interact with its recipients on equal terms. Emma shared her room with 2 other girls, Maria, whose parents had died in an industrial accident, and Sarah, who had aged out of the foster care system but had been given a chance to complete high school at Riverside Academy through a program funded by guilty wealthy parents whose own children attended the school. The 3 girls had formed a tight bond based on their shared understanding of what it meant to be outsiders in a world designed for insiders. They supported each other through the daily humiliations and small cruelties that came with being charity cases in an institution built on exclusivity, sharing strategies for navigating social situations where their presence was tolerated but not welcomed. The Autumn Fundraising Gala was Riverside Academy's most important social event of the year, an evening when parents, alumni, and benefactors gathered to celebrate the school's achievements while contributing to its endowment. The Great Hall was transformed for the occasion with flowers that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month, and a catering company that had prepared a 7-course meal using ingredients flown in from around the world. The scholarship students had been invited to attend, not as guests but as examples of the school's charitable mission. They were expected to mingle with donors, share stories of gratitude for the opportunities they had been given, and generally serve as living testimonials to the power of philanthropy to transform lives. Emma understood the role she was expected to play, but that didn't make it any easier to perform. She had borrowed a dress from one of the older scholarship students, a black outfit that was simple enough to be appropriate but not elegant enough to make her stand out among the designer gowns worn by the paying students. Her shoes were from a thrift store, carefully cleaned and polished to hide their age and wear. She had spent an hour practicing conversations in front of the mirror, preparing responses to questions about her background that would be inspiring but not too detailed, grateful but not desperate. The Great Hall buzzed with the energy of wealth and privilege, with conversations about vacation homes and business acquisitions mixing with discussions of charitable giving and social responsibility. Emma moved through the crowd carefully, smiling when spoken to and answering questions with the appropriate level of appreciation for her circumstances. But as the evening progressed, she began to notice a pattern in how she and the other scholarship students were being treated. They were introduced to donors as success stories, but they weren't included in the casual conversations that flowed around them. They were praised for their resilience and determination, but they weren't invited to sit at tables during the dinner portion of the evening. When the meal was announced, Emma watched as paying students and their families moved toward elaborately decorated tables while she and the other scholarship recipients were directed toward a smaller area near the kitchen entrance. The tables there were simpler, with fewer flowers and less expensive place settings, clearly marked as separate from the main dining area. "I think there's been a mistake," Emma said to Mrs. Pemberton, the development director who was coordinating the scholarship students' participation in the event. "We weren't given table assignments." Mrs. Pemberton smiled with the practiced patience of someone who dealt with confused children regularly. "Oh, sweetheart, you're not eating with the main group tonight. We've arranged a special area for our scholarship families where you'll be more comfortable." The explanation was delivered with the kind of gentle condescension that made it clear this wasn't a mistake, but a deliberate decision to maintain separation between the charity cases and the actual guests. Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but she knew better than to argue with someone who held power over her continued presence at the school. She looked around at the other scholarship students, who were accepting their exclusion with the resigned dignity of people who had learned not to expect equal treatment. Maria was already heading toward the designated area with her shoulders straight but her eyes focused on the floor. Sarah was whispering something to one of the younger scholarship students who looked like she might cry. But before Emma could follow them to their segregated seating area, she was approached by Victoria Pemberton, the development director's daughter and one of Riverside Academy's most influential students. Victoria moved through the school like she owned it, which in many ways she did, given her family's substantial contributions to the institution over several generations. "Emma, right?" Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to thank you for sharing your story with my parents earlier. It's so inspiring to see how grateful you are for this opportunity." The emphasis on the word grateful was subtle but unmistakable, a reminder that Emma's presence at the school was conditional on her willingness to perform appreciation for benefactors who expected to be acknowledged for their generosity. "I am grateful," Emma replied carefully, understanding that her response was being evaluated for the appropriate level of humility. "I'm sure you are," Victoria continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never doubted her right to judge others. "And I hope you understand how important it is for you to remember that." Some of the other scholarship students seemed to forget sometimes that they're guests here, not actual students. The distinction was cruel and deliberate, designed to remind Emma that her academic achievements and personal worth were less important than her status as a charity case. Around them, other paying students had begun to notice the conversation, drawn by the opportunity to witness someone being put in their place. "Actually," said Madison Cooper, Victoria's best friend and fellow arbiter of social hierarchy, "I heard that some of the scholarship students were complaining about not being included in all the same activities as paying students." "Can you imagine?" Being given a free education worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and still finding things to complain about. The group of students gathering around them laughed with the casual cruelty of people who had never known want or uncertainty, who couldn't imagine what it felt like to be grateful for opportunities while still yearning for dignity and inclusion. Emma felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being surrounded by people who saw her as entertainment rather than as a person with feelings and aspirations. She had learned in foster care how to endure humiliation without giving her tormentors the satisfaction of seeing her break, but the skill had never become easy to use. "I think there might be some confusion," Emma said quietly, trying to find a way to extract herself from the situation without escalating the conflict. "I should probably go find my assigned table." "Oh, there's no confusion," Victoria said with practiced sweetness. "You're exactly where you belong. The scholarship area is over there, near the kitchen. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable with your own kind." The phrase, "your own kind," hung in the air like a physical presence, reducing Emma to nothing more than her circumstances, stripping away her intelligence and ambition and humanity to leave only her status as someone who needed charity to survive. But before Emma could respond, the sound of helicopter rotors began to cut through the evening air, growing louder and more insistent until conversations throughout the great hall began to pause and people started looking toward the windows that faced the school's courtyard. The helicopter that landed in Riverside Academy's courtyard was unlike anything most of the assembled guests had ever seen outside of military ceremonies or presidential visits. It was a sleek, black aircraft that spoke of serious government business, with the kind of official markings that suggested its passengers were not ordinary travelers. The rotors continued to spin as figures emerged from the aircraft, but even from a distance it was clear that whoever had arrived was important enough to command immediate attention and respect. Inside the Great Hall, conversations had stopped completely as people pressed against windows to get a better view of the unexpected arrival. The sound of the rotors was deafening, drowning out all other noise and creating an atmosphere of anticipation and uncertainty that spread through the crowd like electricity. Victoria Pemberton had gone pale, her previous confidence replaced by the nervous energy of someone who sensed that whatever was happening was beyond her control or understanding. Around her, the group of students who had been enjoying Emma's humiliation began to look uncertain, their casual cruelty interrupted by the arrival of something that demanded their attention and possibly their respect. Mrs. Pemberton appeared at Emma's side with the kind of forced calm that administrators use when they're trying to maintain order in situations they don't understand. "Emma, dear," she said with a voice that trembled slightly, "I need you to come with me. There are some people here who want to speak with you." Emma felt a surge of panic. In her experience, unexpected visits from officials usually meant bad news, placement changes, legal problems, or bureaucratic complications that would disrupt whatever stability she had managed to achieve. She had learned to dread the arrival of social workers and government representatives who carried clipboards and serious expressions. "Am I in trouble?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the continuing sound of helicopter rotors. "No, sweetheart," Mrs. Pemberton replied, but her tone suggested that she wasn't entirely certain about the answer. I think they're here because of good news. But we need to go outside to meet them." As they walked through the great hall toward the main entrance, Emma became aware that everyone was watching her. The paying students and their parents who had been treating her as invisible just moments before were now staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to something that might have been envy. The group that had been humiliating her followed at a distance, their earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty about what they had just witnessed. Victoria whispered urgently to her mother, trying to understand how the scholarship student they had been dismissing could suddenly be the center of such significant attention. Outside, the courtyard was illuminated by floodlights that had been activated by the school security team. The helicopter sat in the center of the space like a sleeping predator, its rotors finally beginning to slow as the engines wound down. 3 figures stood near the aircraft, all wearing dark suits and carrying themselves with the kind of authority that made it clear they were accustomed to being taken seriously. The man in the center was tall and distinguished, with gray hair, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. As Emma approached with Mrs. Pemberton and a growing crowd of curious onlookers, he stepped forward and smiled with genuine warmth that was unlike any expression she had seen directed toward her all evening. "Emma Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Yes, sir," Emma replied, still uncertain about what was happening but recognizing that this man was someone important enough to arrive by government helicopter. "My name is Robert Castellanos," he said, extending his hand with the respect one adult shows another. I'm the Secretary of Education for the United States of America." The crowd behind Emma gasped audibly. Secretary Castellanos was a household name, someone whose face appeared regularly on news programs and whose decisions affected millions of students across the country. His presence at a small private school fundraiser was unprecedented and inexplicable. "I've been looking for you for quite some time," Secretary Castellanos continued, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to embrace Emma personally. "We received your letter." Emma's mind raced as she tried to understand what he was referring to. 3 months earlier, in a moment of frustration and hope, she had written a letter to the Department of Education. It had been a desperate attempt to advocate for better funding for foster children's educational needs, written late at night in her dormitory room after a particularly difficult day of being reminded of her outsider status. She had never expected anyone to read it, let alone respond to it. Letters from foster children to government officials usually disappeared into bureaucratic filing systems, acknowledged with form letters that thanked the sender for their interest while promising nothing of substance. "My letter," Emma said, still trying to process the surreal nature of the situation. "Your letter about educational equity for children in foster care," Secretary Castellanos replied. 47 pages of the most comprehensive analysis of systemic problems in our educational system that my office has ever received. Written by someone who understands these issues not as abstract policy questions, but as lived experiences that affect real children every day. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather portfolio, the same kind that high-level government officials use for important documents. "Emma, your letter has been circulated throughout the Department of Education and the White House. It's been read by senators, cabinet members, and policy advisors who are responsible for making decisions about how we educate vulnerable children in America. More importantly, it's been read by the President of the United States." The silence in the courtyard was so complete that Emma could hear her own heartbeat. Around her, students and parents who had been treating her as a charity case just minutes before were staring at her with expressions of shock and disbelief. Secretary Castellanos opened his portfolio and removed a document bearing the official seal of the President of the United States. "Emma Rodriguez," he said formally, "by order of the President and the Secretary of Education, you are hereby offered a full scholarship to any university in the United States, with additional funding for graduate studies and a guaranteed position in the Department of Education upon completion of your education." The words seemed to hang in the air like something impossible and magical. Emma felt her knees weaken as the magnitude of what she was hearing began to sink in. This wasn't just about her education. This was about her entire future, about possibilities she had never dared to imagine. "But more than that," Secretary Castellanos continued, "the President has asked me to personally invite you to serve as an advisor on a new initiative to reform educational opportunities for children in foster care. Your insights will help shape policy that affects hundreds of thousands of young people who face the same challenges you've overcome." Victoria Pemberton made a sound like a wounded animal. The girl she had been humiliating minutes earlier for being a charity case was being offered opportunities that even her family's wealth and connections couldn't guarantee. Around the courtyard, other students were beginning to whisper among themselves, trying to process the complete reversal they were witnessing. "There's one more thing," Secretary Castellanos said, and his voice took on a more personal tone. "The President wanted me to tell you that your letter reminded him why he went into public service. He's asked me to convey his personal gratitude for your courage in speaking truth to power and his commitment to ensuring that no child's potential is wasted because of circumstances beyond their control." Emma felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that someone had not only heard her voice but had valued it enough to take action. For 15 years, she had felt invisible to people who mattered, overlooked by systems that were supposed to protect her, dismissed by institutions that claimed to care about her welfare. "I don't know what to say," Emma managed to whisper. "You don't need to say anything," Secretary Castellanos replied gently. "You've already said everything that needed to be said. Your letter spoke for thousands of children who don't have a voice, who are trapped in systems that fail them every day. Now we're going to do something about it." He looked around the courtyard at the assembled crowd of wealthy students and parents who had been witnessing this extraordinary moment. "I want everyone here to understand something," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the space. "True excellence doesn't come from privilege or family connections. It comes from people like Emma, who see problems clearly because they've lived with them, who develop solutions because they understand what's at stake, who refuse to accept injustice because they know what justice should look like." He turned back to Emma with a smile that radiated genuine respect and admiration. The helicopter is waiting to take you to Washington, if you're ready to begin changing the world. The flight to Washington took 2 hours, but for Emma it felt like traveling to another planet. She sat in the government helicopter looking down at landscapes that represented a country she was about to help reshape, thinking about the letter she had written in frustration and hope, never imagining it would lead to this moment. Secretary Castellanos had given her time to gather her belongings from the dormitory, a process that took less than 15 minutes since everything she owned fit easily into 2 small suitcases. The other scholarship students had hugged her goodbye with tears of joy and pride, understanding that her success represented hope for all of them. The paying students had watched her departure with expressions ranging from shock to something that might have been shame. Victoria Pemberton had tried to approach her before she left, perhaps to apologize or to somehow align herself with Emma's sudden importance, but Emma had been too focused on the magnitude of what was happening to engage in conversations about the past. In Washington, Emma was taken directly to the Department of Education, where she met with policy advisors who had been working on foster care educational initiatives for years without the benefit of insider perspective. Her letter had provided insights they had never considered, solutions they hadn't imagined, and a clarity of vision that came from understanding problems not as academic exercises but as daily realities. Over the following months, Emma worked with a team of researchers and policy experts to develop comprehensive reforms to how educational opportunities were provided to children in foster care. Her input shaped everything from funding formulas to support services, from college preparation programs to mentorship initiatives that connected foster children with successful adults who had overcome similar challenges. The scholarship she had been offered allowed her to attend Stanford University, where she studied public policy and education with the intensity of someone who understood that her education was not just about personal advancement, but about her ability to serve others who faced the challenges she had overcome. She graduated summa cum laude 4 years later, then completed a master's degree in education policy before returning to Washington to take her position in the Department of Education. But perhaps the most significant change was in how she saw herself and her worth. For 15 years, she had been defined by what she lacked: parents, family connections, financial resources, social status. The recognition she received in Washington helped her understand that she also possessed things that others lacked: perspective, empathy, resilience, and the kind of authentic understanding that can only come from lived experience. The initiative she helped develop became a model for other countries struggling with similar issues. Foster children across America began to receive educational support that acknowledged their unique challenges while building on their unique strengths. Colleges and universities created programs specifically designed to help students who had aged out of foster care navigate higher education successfully. Emma kept in touch with the other scholarship students from Riverside Academy, many of whom went on to achieve their own remarkable successes. Maria became a civil rights lawyer who specialized in representing children in foster care. Sarah became a social worker who redesigned how foster families were trained and supported. Together, they formed a network of advocates who understood that systemic change required people who had experienced systems from the inside. Years later, when Emma was serving as Deputy Secretary of Education, she would sometimes think about that night at Riverside Academy when she had been excluded from dinner and humiliated for her background. The memory no longer carried the sting of shame, but it served as a reminder of why her work mattered, why policies needed to be shaped by people who understood their real-world impact. She kept the borrowed dress she had worn that night, not as a memento of humiliation but as a symbol of transformation. It hung in her closet next to the designer suits she now wore to meetings with senators and cabinet members, a reminder that worth isn't determined by circumstances but by character, that potential can't be measured by privilege, and that sometimes the most important voices belong to people who have been systematically silenced. The Riverside Academy fundraising gala continued to be held annually, but it had become a very different kind of event. The scholarship program was expanded and redesigned to ensure that all students were treated with equal dignity and given equal opportunities. The segregated seating was eliminated, and scholarship students were integrated fully into all aspects of school life. Most importantly, the school's mission statement was revised to reflect a new understanding of what excellence meant. The motto carved in marble above the main entrance was replaced with words that Emma had suggested: excellence through understanding. Acknowledging that the greatest achievements come not from inherited privilege but from the wisdom that emerges when barriers are broken down and all voices are heard. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with a single voice speaking truth that others have been afraid to acknowledge. Emma's story reminds us that potential exists in unexpected places, that solutions often come from people who understand problems most intimately, and that systemic change requires the participation of those who have been systematically excluded. The measure of a society isn't found in how it treats its most privileged members, but in how it responds when its most vulnerable citizens find the courage to speak up and demand better. Because sometimes the orphan girl eating alone in the corner has insights that can reshape how an entire nation thinks about justice, opportunity, and the responsibility we all share to ensure that every child has the chance to reach their potential. This story was brought to you by Heroes Unheard. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Tell us in the comments what they meant to you and how you remember them. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.